Nearly half of wealthy investors under 44 now own cryptocurrency, but that's just the beginning of the story. Bank of America just released a study that found younger, affluent investors, we're talking people in their 30s and 40s earning between $350,000 and $1 million a year, allocate 3 times more of their portfolios to alternative assets than older generations. And here's the kicker. Passion investments like rare whiskey have outperformed the S&P 500 by 180 percentage points over the past decade. Not just kept pace, crushed it. Today, I'm breaking down the alternative investments that high-earning parents are actually putting their money into. Not what financial advisors tell them to buy, but what they're really doing with their wealth. And more importantly, why they're doing it. First, we need to understand why this shift is happening at all. Because this isn't just rich people being bored with index funds. A staggering 72% of investors under 44 believe that relying solely on stocks and bonds is no longer enough to generate above-average returns. 72%. Compare that to older investors, only 28% of them feel that way. That's not a gap, that's a chasm in how 2 generations view wealth building. So what happened? Why are younger, affluent investors so skeptical of the traditional 60-40 portfolio? Well, think about what this demographic lived through. They started their careers during or right after the 2008 financial crisis. They watched safe investments evaporate. They saw their parents' generation lose homes, retirement accounts decimated. Then they witnessed the fastest tech boom in human history. Bitcoin went from joke to legitimate asset class. Companies that didn't exist in 2010 became trillion-dollar behemoths by 2020. These experiences fundamentally rewired how this generation thinks about risk and reward. But here's the important context. We're talking about families earning $350,000 to $1 million annually. Often dual-income households, usually with 2 or 3 kids, living in major metro areas. These aren't trust fund kids playing with inherited wealth. These are highly educated professionals, doctors, lawyers, tech executives, entrepreneurs who've built their income through achievement. And they're bringing that same ambitious entrepreneurial mindset to their investment strategy. They're not just trying to beat the market. They're trying to build wealth in ways that align with how they see the world changing. And that leads us to what they're actually buying. Alternative investment number 1, real estate beyond the primary home. Now, I know what you're thinking. Real estate isn't alternative, that's been around forever. And you're right. But the way affluent families are approaching it has changed dramatically. 31% of younger wealthy investors chose real estate as offering the greatest growth prospects out of all asset classes. Number 1, beating out private equity, beating out crypto, beating out everything. But here's what's interesting. They're not just buying investment properties to be landlords and deal with tenant calls at 2 a.m. They're strategically purchasing vacation homes that serve a dual purpose. Think about it. A lake house in North Carolina or a mountain cabin in Colorado that the family uses for summers and holidays, but also generates rental income the rest of the year through Airbnb or VRBO. This is the key insight. They're collapsing the boundary between investment and lifestyle. The traditional model was, you have your personal life over here and your investment portfolio over there, and never the two shall meet. But affluent families with kids realize something crucial. They can build wealth and create family memories simultaneously. That vacation home isn't just an asset on a spreadsheet. It's where their kids learn to ski, where they host extended family for Thanksgiving, where they create the childhood experiences they want their kids to remember. And the data backs this up. Real estate is particularly favored. Aside from owning expensive primary homes, many pursue investment properties or vacation homes for both family use and appreciation potential. The typical playbook looks like this. They buy a property in a desirable location. Maybe it's near where they already vacation or somewhere they're considering for eventual retirement. They use it personally for 4 to 6 weeks a year. The rest of the time, it's rented out at premium rates to offset the mortgage and property costs. And here's the psychological genius of this approach. Every time they use the property, they're not feeling guilty about an expensive vacation. They're checking on their investment. Every family memory made there is literally happening inside an appreciating asset. Plus, their kids are growing up with this model of wealth building. They're learning that assets can serve multiple purposes, that you can enjoy your wealth while building it. This is a fundamentally different mindset than the generation that sacrificed everything for retirement and then wondered if they wasted their best years. All right, this next category is where things get really interesting, and honestly, where the most money is being made in ways that would blow traditional financial advisors' minds. Passion investments, also called investments of passion or alternative tangibles. We're talking about fine art, classic cars, rare watches, vintage wine and whiskey, high-end jewelry, and yes, even luxury handbags. Now, before you roll your eyes, let me give you the numbers that made me take this seriously. Rare whiskey prices are up 280% since 2013. Wine is up 146%. Watches, 138%. All of these have exceeded the S&P 500's returns over the same period. 280% on whiskey, while it sits in your climate-controlled basement. Knight Frank does a global wealth survey every year tracking these alternative assets, and wealthier North Americans are especially keen on classic automobiles and diamonds, and items like classic cars, fine art, wine, and rare whiskey have seen increased demand. But here's what makes this truly fascinating. The number one reason wealthy investors buy these assets isn't pure profit. It's the joy of ownership and personal passion. Consider fine art. 83% of wealthy millennials and Gen Z either own or want to own an art collection, but they're not buying art to flip it in 6 months. They're buying pieces they love, that reflect their taste, that they display in their homes and get to enjoy every single day. And the art is appreciating while hanging on their wall. This is the ultimate expression of have your cake and eat it too investing. The traditional model said you invest in boring things that make money, and then you spend that money on things you enjoy. Two separate activities. The passion investment model says, what if I invest in the things I enjoy? What if my portfolio brings me joy every day, not just when I check the balance? The value of many collectibles has outpaced the stock market over the past decade, but these affluent collectors aren't pure profit seekers. They purchase items because they genuinely enjoy using them or displaying them as part of their lifestyle. Private equity and direct company investments. This is where the entrepreneurial DNA of this demographic really shows up. 26% of younger wealthy investors cited private equity as a top opportunity. 22% pointed to direct investment in companies. So we're talking about roughly 1 in 4 of these high earners actively seeking equity stakes in businesses, whether through formal private equity funds, venture capital, or direct angel investments in startups. Now, why is this demographic so drawn to private company investments? First, they have the networks. When you're a tech executive in San Francisco or a partner at a law firm in New York, your college roommate is launching a fintech startup. Your neighbor is raising a Series A for a healthcare company. Your kid's soccer coach is building a consumer brand. These opportunities flow naturally through their professional and social circles in a way they don't for most Americans. Second, they understand business operations. These aren't passive investors hoping a fund manager picks winners. They can actually evaluate a business model, understand unit economics, and add value beyond just capital. But third, and I think most importantly, they want agency. When you put money in an S&P 500 index fund, you're a price taker. You have zero control. You're along for the ride based on what millions of other investors collectively decide. When you invest in a startup or take equity in a private company, you have a relationship with the founders. You might have board representation. You can influence outcomes. You can actually help build something. For high-achieving people who are used to succeeding through effort and intelligence, this is psychologically much more satisfying than passive index investing. These motivations can stem from a desire for higher returns, diversification, or even a sense of control and personal involvement that publicly traded assets don't provide. Now, the reality check. Most of these investments will fail or underperform. That's the nature of early-stage investing. But you only need 1 or 2 big wins to make the entire strategy worthwhile. And for families earning $500,000 plus per year, they can afford to have 5 to 10% of their portfolio in higher risk, higher reward direct investments. If they lose it all, it doesn't materially change their life. But if one investment 10 times or 100 times, it could be generational wealth. That asymmetric risk-reward profile is incredibly attractive to this demographic. All right, we need to talk about crypto, because the data here surprised even me. Nearly half of young affluent investors now own cryptocurrency, with 38% more interested in it. They view crypto as one of the top growth opportunities, second only to real estate. Now, I know crypto is controversial, and I'm not here to tell you whether Bitcoin is going to $1 million or to zero. But what's interesting is how this demographic is thinking about it. They're not YOLOing their life savings into dog-themed meme coins. This is typically 2 to 5% of their portfolio. It's a calculated allocation to an asset class they believe representing the future of finance, even if the path there is volatile. And remember the context. 72% of investors under 44 believe solely relying on traditional stocks and bonds is no longer enough. They're actively seeking diversification beyond traditional assets. For them, the question isn't, should I put my entire portfolio in crypto? It's, should I have zero exposure to what might be a transformational technology? And for most, the answer is that zero exposure feels like more risk than modest exposure. But here's what's really going on psychologically. FOMO, fear of missing out, is a powerful force in social networks of high earners. When your colleague made 10 times on Ethereum, when your brother-in-law keeps talking about his Bitcoin position, when half your Twitter feed is crypto natives, not participating starts to feel like you're being left behind. So most took a pragmatic approach. Allocate a small percentage, enough to have exposure if it works out, but not enough to materially harm their financial plan if it doesn't. And critically, an equal proportion of these investors also own physical gold. They're hedging in both directions, new digital gold and old physical gold. That's actually a pretty sophisticated approach to portfolio construction for uncertain times. The key insight? Affluent families aren't crypto true believers or crypto skeptics. They're portfolio optimizers who want asymmetric upside exposure while managing downside risk. Speaking of gold, let's talk about tangible hedges and commodities. This might seem old school compared to crypto and NFTs, but physical gold ownership among young affluent investors is substantial, equal to crypto ownership. And this makes total sense when you consider what this demographic lived through recently. 2021 to 2023, the highest inflation in 40 years. These families watched their cash savings lose 15 to 20% of purchasing power in just 2 years. They saw grocery bills spike. Gas prices hit $5 a gallon. Their property insurance jumped 20 to 30%. Even with high incomes, they felt it, and it scared them. The research notes that affluent families responded to high inflation by seeking higher yields and inflation hedges. There was a spike in purchases of inflation-indexed bonds, commodities, and real assets. Gold, historically, is the go-to inflation hedge. It's been a store of value for thousands of years. When fiat currency looks shaky, gold looks attractive. But here's what's interesting about how modern affluent families approach this. They're not gold bugs building bunkers. They're typically allocating 5 to 10% of their portfolio to commodities as insurance. Think of it like home insurance. You don't buy home insurance hoping your house burns down. You buy it for peace of mind. Physical gold for many wealthy families serves the same psychological function. When stocks crash, gold typically holds value or goes up. When inflation spikes, gold preserves purchasing power. When geopolitical chaos erupts, gold is a safe haven. It's the sleep well at night portion of the portfolio. All right, the seventh alternative investment might be the most important one, even though it's the hardest to quantify. Values-based and impact investing. And this makes perfect sense when you understand who we're talking about. These are parents with 2 or 3 kids. They're thinking about the world their children will inherit. Climate change isn't an abstract policy debate when you're worried about your daughter's future. Social inequality isn't academic when you're trying to teach your son about fairness and justice. Having kids fundamentally changes how you see the world. And for affluent parents, it changes how they want to use their capital. Now, the skeptics will say, this is just feel-good investing. You're sacrificing returns for warm fuzzies. But here's the thing. Values-based investing isn't necessarily about sacrifice anymore. Many ESG funds have matched or beaten traditional benchmarks over the past decade. Clean energy companies have been some of the best performing stocks. But even if there was a modest return sacrifice, many affluent parents would make that trade. Because what's the point of maximizing wealth if you're maximizing it in a world you don't want to live in? Younger, affluent donors are particularly passionate about causes like homelessness, social justice, and the environment. And they're involving their kids in these decisions. They're explaining why they invest in certain companies. They're bringing children to volunteer at charities they support. They're teaching the next generation that wealth comes with responsibility. This is about legacy building, not just financial legacy, but values legacy. All right, let's zoom out and look at the big picture here. 7 alternative investments. But the real story isn't the specific assets, it's the mindset shift. Think about the common thread through all of these alternatives. Real estate that your family actually uses, art that hangs on your walls, cars you drive, startups founded by people you know, technology you believe in, gold that makes you sleep better, companies making the world you want your kids to inherit. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're tangible, meaningful, connected to actual life. If you found this valuable, drop a comment and let me know which of these alternative investments surprised you most. Or if you're already doing any of these, I'd love to hear about it. And if you want to see more deep dives into how affluent families actually manage their money, not the advice they get, but what they really do, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.